Coming up in the next hour of local news on Arizona PBS. On Arizona Horizon, it's a debate between the candidates running for Maricopa County Attorney. It's a full 1 hour debate, and it's next on Arizona Horizon.
This hour of local news is made possible by contributions from the Friends of PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to the special Election 2020 edition of Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Tonight we feature a debate between the two candidates for Maricopa County Attorney. The County Attorney's Office is the third largest public prosecutorial agency in the nation. The office handles all felony prosecutions and misdemeanor filings in the county's court system. This debate is a joint effort between Arizona PBS, the Arizona Republic, and KJZZ Radio. And joining me to moderate is Richard Ruelas of the Arizona Republic and Steve Goldstein of KJZZ.
This is not a formal debate, but an open exchange of ideas, an opportunity for give and take between the candidates. Interjections and even interruptions are allowed, provided all sides get a fair shake, and it's our job to make sure that happens.
And joining us now for tonight's debate in alphabetical order, Republican incumbent Allister Adel, who has previously provided legal services for state agencies and started her career at the county attorney's office. And Democratic challenger Julie Gunnigle, an attorney who is a former law professor and prosecutor. And each candidate will now be given a 1-minute opening statement with the order determined by random selection. Closing statements will be given in reverse order, and we begin with Allister Adel.
Thank you. I went to law school to be a prosecutor, to protect Maricopa County and its vulnerable. As your Maricopa County attorney, I have a record of accomplishments about holding criminals accountable, getting treatment for those who want it, and keeping children and families safe. These are smart justice reforms that ensure the most dangerous are held accountable, while those who want to do better and be better get the services that they need. Over the next hour, you are going to see a dramatic difference between myself, who has experience and a proven record of results, versus my opponent, who has well-rehearsed lines and empty rhetoric. I invite you to learn more about me at my website, AllisterAdel.com.
And now we turn to Julie Gunnigle.
Good evening. I'm Julie Gunnigle. I was born, raised, and educated right here in the Valley. I hold a degree in chemistry from NAU and a law degree from the University of Notre Dame. During my career, it has been my honor to serve as a prosecutor both in Illinois and Indiana, where I focused on child-on-child sexual assault, financial crime, and public corruption cases. I'm running to be your next Maricopa County attorney because our criminal justice system is broken. We need a criminal justice system that will be tough, smart, and fair. A criminal justice system that will be tough on the crimes that matter, crimes that target women, children, and our seniors, that will be smart with reforms that will keep us safe and save us money, and that will be fair and provide equity, because Maricopa County has some of the worst racial disparities when it comes to sentencing and policing in the nation. My name is Julie Gunnigle, and you can find more about me at Gunnigle2020.com.
Candidates, thank you very much. Allister, we'll get started with you. Critics look at the incarceration rate in Arizona, and folks sent from Maricopa County say it's too high. It needs to come down. Is it too high, and how would you bring that incarceration down?
I agree with you. It's too high, and I really want to talk about the accomplishments made in one short year, and I challenge anybody to look at any other public official that has accomplished more in 1 year than I have. For instance, we want to make sure that we're not institutionalizing people, that they are able to get the second chance that they need, which is why I created a robust diversion program. Diversion meaning those who want to do better, be better. They get the treatment they need for mental illness, drug addiction, homelessness, whatever it is, so that they can be successful. I've also eliminated the financial barrier so that people can participate in those programs. I've also instituted the first home detention program in Maricopa County ever. We have to be better as a society and look at this collectively, and it takes the cross-sector collaborations about how we can do better and be better together. especially with drug addiction and mental health. Those are two areas we see a lot. People are committing crimes to these underlying illnesses. We have to be there so they can be successful and not breaking into your house or my car.
Julie, you have said your goal is to reduce incarceration, the rate from Maricopa County, to 26% over the next 4 years. How do you do that and keep the community safe?
Good question. You know, in Arizona, we spend $1.2 billion every year in our criminal justice system. That is more than we spend in our world-class university system, more than we spend in our community college system, and more than we spend in our public health system combined. We are the 5th largest incarcerator in the country, and we're the 8th largest in the world. So what we need to realize is, as a state, we are out of step with the rest of the nation, which is why it's so important that county attorneys take on mass incarceration and make bold commitments like I have to reduce the incarceration rate by 26%. I'll note that my opponent has made no such commitment and has set no such goal. But how we get there is putting in diversion and deflection programs that work, creating specialty court system, and stopping some of the more disgusting charge stacking policies that we have here in our state.
Did what you heard from Allister, did those not make sense to you? Would those not work in cutting down that rate?
Well, let's talk about why. The diversion program that my opponent has instituted is a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. The fact of the matter is that most cases that come through the Maricopa County Attorney's Office are drug cases, and anyone who's had any experience with addiction knows that the path to recovery isn't always that straight line. So in making that diversion program, my opponent has made it a one-and-done program, which means that people who relapse, people who experience repeated instances of addiction don't have that opportunity to, as she puts it, do better and be better. So we really don't get at the problem.
Response, please.
Sure, Mr. Simons. I appreciate my opponent endorsing what I've already been doing. I really want to be clear here. It's not a one-and-done program. You don't go to prison for your first drug offense. That's our law here in Arizona, and it's not the law in Chicago, clearly. But we have also overhauled every single plea policy to give more discretion to our lawyers to make sure that we come to the right conclusion. Because in my office, we take a treatment-first approach. And diversion is not a Band-Aid because we have moved to an evidence-based program. And despite the pandemic, we have nearly 3,000 people that have been offered diversion since May. So I have a track record of doing this. It's not rhetoric, it's accomplishments.
Allister, let's move to broader reform. Your predecessor, Bill Montgomery, was criticized for being too involved with the legislature and perhaps stopping certain reforms. We've seen from the Koch brothers to the ACLU, people want to see certain reforms. What sort of reforms in a minor way, whether it's sentencing or something else, do you want to see? And as part of that, would you lobby the legislature? Do you think that's appropriate?
I think some level of lobbying the legislature is appropriate. I know that the legislators look to us as county attorneys for guidance, especially on criminal law that they don't know. Prior to COVID-19, I was working with bipartisan groups, Representative Bolding, Senator Navarrete, Representative Bullock, Representative Blackman, to look at things like sensible expungement laws, which we don't have in Arizona, eliminating more barriers to diversion, getting more funding for diversion, and looking at smart criminal justice reforms. These conversations continue to be ongoing, even during the summer months, because this is something that is important to me. I talked about it when I was appointed by the Board of Supervisors with a unanimous bipartisan vote, and we are going to continue this with our legislative agenda coming in the fall. But I don't believe criminal justice reform is strictly legislative.
Julie, would you push the legislature to act? Would you lobby them? Would you lobby both sides?
Absolutely, because the role of the county attorney should be one of a subject matter expert when it comes to criminal justice reform. In particular, lobbying for earned release credits, an end to the disgusting legacy of Bill Montgomery and charge stacking, and our end to charging Hannah Priors would be a top priority for me. I would note, though, my opponent's record when it comes to lobbying the legislature, because it hasn't been a record of being down there asking for sensible police reforms like body-worn cameras.
That's actually not true.
Instead, the county attorney has lobbied for SB 1070 copycat legislation.
It's not true.
Legislation that would have cost our state millions in lost revenue and would have continued down that path akin to what Sheriff Joe Arpaio has done.
Allister, respond, please.
Sure. My opponent wants to run against my predecessor, Bill Montgomery, and the former Sheriff Arpaio. In fact, she heckled me in an event saying I supported SB 1070. I'm not my predecessors, and I think my proven track record shows that. And I was down in the legislature and having conversations from the day I started in October 2019 with chiefs of police to discuss body-worn cameras. And then recently I came up publicly urging it. These conversations have been ongoing for a year since I have been your county attorney.
Let's move to a specific case, and it's the case of Dion Johnson, a motorist who was sleeping along I-17 and ended up being shot by a Department of Public Safety officer. Ms. Gunnigle, you criticized the decision from Ms. Adel to not charge, but it's unclear for me what you would have done had you been in that position. What crime, if any, did you see in that shooting?
Absolutely. Let me be perfectly clear. As a mere civilian, I don't have access to the same records that Ms. Adel does. And my criticism and the cowardice of this process has been aimed at the process. Because here in Maricopa County, we don't have a process we can be proud of when it comes to police use of force cases. The fact that my opponent couldn't be bothered to look at the DPS file for Trooper Cervantes, a DPS file that would have revealed 13 separate acts of misconduct, one of which was tasing a puppy with a state-issued taser, and instead decided to Google his background, I thought was shameful and incomplete. I'd also note that the process has become even more obscure and less transparent under Ms. Adel, as she has decided to use a community-involved process where we don't know who the community members are. They all sign non-disclosure agreements. That's not good government. Last, the process doesn't have any sort of finite timeline. And in this case, Mrs. Johnson, Dion's mom, still hasn't had her son's property released to her. That's not a process we can be proud of, and that's what needs to change. And
before we go to you, Ms. Adel, again, just to put a note on it, I know you say you don't have any more information than, say, a member of the general public, but did you see a crime in what you've read or what your understanding of the case is?
Well, in terms of seeing a crime, I would tell you how I would approach this case, because what we really need is we need objectivity. We need a truly independent unit to evaluate these police use of force cases, and that's not what we have right now.
Ms. Adel, your response?
Well, it's too bad we got a non-answer from my opponent, but I can tell you that the process has never, ever been more transparent in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office than it has now. We have the most transparent Maricopa County Attorney's Office than we've ever had, as evidence under my leadership. I can tell you that we knew about Officer Cervantes' background. And to correct my opponent's lies, we did not Google it. What I said in a press conference is that it's out there. Anybody can Google it. We knew. DPS would not hand over the file to us. But I will tell you that his background would never have come into evidence. He was not on a Brady list for disclosure. The other thing, we did not consider the background and criminal history of the decedent, Mr. Johnson, at all. It wasn't relevant. The community members that are on the board, that has been under my leadership. The first step I took when I started was I put staff members who are not attorneys on there to have a different mindset. And then we opened it up to community members to apply. And they're getting the same training as our lawyers do on excessive use of force, things like that. And they were vetted, they were backgrounded, but we are not releasing their names for public safety reasons, for their safety. We will, however, release demographics about who they are, and I've talked about it before. We have a very diverse group on that panel, and we had 4 of them there for Mr. Johnson. And as far as release of the property, the way things work is that when a prosecution agency turns down a case, it goes to the police agency, and we say, release all property, and then it's up to the police agency. So that is a question for DPS and Phoenix.
Yeah, I want you to respond to what you just heard from Allister Adel, and I have another question for you, but respond, please.
Absolutely. So I want the public to know that it doesn't have to be this way. With Phoenix, we have a civilian review board. It's open. It's a dozen members. We know who they are because that's the hallmark of good government. It's not decisions that are made in secret behind closed doors where you don't know who's making those decisions. And the fact of the matter is we live in a county that is so diverse that 4 individuals can't possibly make up the relevant cross-section of who actually lives here and should have buy-in to these decisions. It's one of the reasons why my opponent continues to come under community scrutiny, because you cannot build trust under this environment.
Is it fair, though, for you to say the decision was an act of cowardice when you don't have enough information to know whether or not this was a criminal act?
Well, again, the process and any decision made under this failed process is absolutely an act of cowardice.
Allister, the decision itself, was it a close call? And if so, how? And if not, how come?
Anytime that there is a loss of life, it's difficult. And I wanted to make sure that I had all of the evidence in this case. This was a difficult decision for me. The committee, made up of seasoned prosecutors, investigators, civilians, they made a recommendation to me. And ultimately, it's my decision, and I did not take it lightly. This is also why I felt it was the time to publicly come out and ask for body-worn cameras for all officers in the field. Because more information as prosecutors is helpful. Would it have changed the outcome? I don't know. But I think it's good public policy that we have body-worn cameras for officers that are deployed, and nothing I can say or do will bring comfort to Mr. Deon Johnson's family or friends.
You said, though, that it was a difficult decision. It sounds like it was a close call. But again, how so? Why was it a close call? Why was it so difficult? The factors, I think people need to learn about judgment here.
Sure. I take these cases very seriously, and they're not made without empathy, and they are not made in haste. Every single one of these are difficult. A life was lost, and that makes any decision difficult. But again, we had limited evidence here. We had evidence that Mr. Johnson was passed out behind the wheel and that a struggle ensued, and many corroborating witnesses said that. At the same time, it is not lost on me the gravity and seriousness of this decision, and so that's what makes it difficult.
A difficult decision with limited evidence. You buying that?
It's still a failed process. Listen, there has been 430 officer-involved shootings since 2001, and yet 2 officers were charged. The community has no trust in this prosecutor because the process is it lacks the transparency, it lacks the public buy-in, and we've seen it. We've seen this in the editorials written by people like Reverend Walton. We've seen this in the protests in the streets. We are not going to have any sort of peace in Arizona until there is justice, and there can be no justice until there's a process we can be proud of.
And Mr. Simons, if I could add on to that, my opponent clearly doesn't know what the county attorney's office does or has done in my leadership. I don't care if you wear a uniform or not. You commit a crime, you will be held accountable. And under my leadership, we have charged an officer in an officer-involved shooting. We have charged officers for pornography. We have charged officers for rape. On duty, off duty, it does not matter. If you commit a crime in Maricopa County, you will be held accountable.
Allister, let's come back to the body camera issue. Calling for DPS to have everyone with body cameras. How do you, first of all, in the position you're in, can these crimes be prosecuted properly without the body camera evidence? And this is not necessarily under your umbrella, but how do you get officers to turn them on so we actually have the evidence?
So 2-part answer to your 2-part question. As far as getting officers to turn them on, that's something that is embedded in training. And we need robust training for our officers in everything from not just turning on your body-worn camera, but de-escalation tactics, dealing with the mentally ill. And that's a training issue, and I would lean on our police departments and their administrators to make sure that they're following the law. And if they don't turn them on, that's an administrative issue for them. And the second part of your question, the first part of your question, how do we get there? Well, this is not a just financial solution. The actual body-worn cameras, they aren't that expensive. It's uploading the data, storing the data. And that's why I keep saying officers in the field that need it. And how do we get there? This takes a 3-part solution, and it's not an either-or. It is making sure that we have the resources and training for our officers in the field so that they can go home safely, meaning don't defund the police. That's just rhetoric, and now apparently we're calling it something like reassessing or reallocating resources. It's the same thing. We need to make sure that we have community resources available for the mentally ill, drug addicts, domestic violence, and we need a strong prosecution agency that is going to hold people accountable. It's not any other. We need all three, and body-worn cameras is always good to have more evidence in a case. And yes, a case can be won without body-worn cameras, but our ethical standard as prosecutors is reasonable likelihood of conviction.
Julie, many things to respond to there, but first of all, can you start with body cameras? How important do you think that is?
They're hugely important, and they're just good policy. But they are the first step when we want to start talking about police reform, because what we really need are things like bans on chokeholds. We need to make sure that there's de-escalation training. We need to make sure that the county attorney not only understands Brady obligations, but has a complete Brady list. But when it comes to body-worn cameras, we also need a prosecutor who's going to stand for them on every day of their tenure and not just as an 11th hour half measure. The fact of the matter is that this bill was pending back in January, and our county attorney was silent. There was a call for a special session in June, and our county attorney was silent. And community leaders like Reg Bolding and Senator Navarrete, the community leaders that she's in conversation with, they've endorsed me because they don't trust her to actually get these reforms done. The additional issue with body-worn cameras is that through this office, there's also been significant delays in the release of that footage. Ryan Whitaker, who was killed in his own doorway, his family waited 54 days. For 54 days, they labored under the impression that Ryan had somehow approached the officer or assaulted the officer. And it was only after 54 days, when the county attorney finally released that footage, that they learned the truth about what had happened to their son, their brother, their friend. So if we're going to have body-worn cameras, we need a county attorney who's willing to actually release that footage and to do so promptly.
You called...
May I respond, please? As to releasing body-worn cameras, we release those when it's appropriate. We don't hide them to protect victims or law enforcement, as my opponent suggested. Our ethical duty as prosecutors is to protect the defendant's due process rights to pretrial publicity. And you can actually go to the police department to actually have the evidence before us. Normally it takes 9 months to a year to review a officer-involved shooting. And these two cases, I made sure it was sped up because it was community interest in these cases. And as far as the Brady list, I know most people don't know what it is. It's officers who have had integrity issues. And I have worked collaboratively with the other 14 county attorneys to have a forward-facing website for all of the officers to be on a list on a website that the public can access.
You, Ms. Gunnigle, you called Ms. Adel's decision to not prosecute in the Dion Johnson case a political move. Is that itself a political statement? Did you have evidence beyond a belief that she did not, or her office did not take a reasoned look at it and decide? And what political motive, what political advantage would have been gained, was gained by not charging in this case?
Listen, in this environment where there's so much lies and disinformation that's being spread, it is in itself a political move to speak truth to power. And in fact, in this case, timing the decision as it was, delaying the decision when it was going to happen on a Friday and instead wait till a Monday, to take 9 months to a year to make any sort of decision on these cases generally, that's all politics. It's one of the reasons why we need to have set timelines for these, and it doesn't take 9 months to a year to review body cam footage. It just simply does not.
Well, let me answer that. I've actually been a prosecutor, and not a part-time prosecutor, and for more than 7 years, and now having run the third largest prosecution agency in the country. In 2018, we had an uptick in officer-involved shootings. So it takes time because, again, we don't want to make these decisions in haste. We have to have everybody prepared to read all the reports and make a solid decision in these cases. And with that, I can tell you that Mr. Whitaker's case, that's also a tragic case. But we're looking at outside expert opinions in that because we're doing our due diligence to do the right thing for the right reasons and not just make a decision. None of this is political. We talk about character-driven leadership in my office. We do the right things for the right reasons every single time. And that's what I've done as your Maricopa County attorney for the last year. And I'm sorry, Richard, What was your question?
Well, I think that sort of answered it. We'll need to move on to another topic, but we'll stay with you, Ms. Adel. And this is hypothetical, but I think a lot of voters are already here, given what we seem to be looking at the makeup of the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And if a case comes up that happens to overturn Roe v. Wade, there are at least 3 laws on the books in Arizona that would come into play. How would you handle potential prosecutions should a department bring those to your office?
Well, that's a great question. I know my opponent uses this outlandish idea that Roe v. Wade's going to get overturned as a scare tactic. There are no cases before the Supreme Court right now. Should Roe v. Wade be overturned, I have always said yes. As a prosecutor, you have to enforce the laws on the books. When law enforcement actually submits a case to you, we're all too busy dealing with the dangerous, violent criminals, the gangs, the cartels. We're not looking at women who exercise their reproductive rights. I can tell you under my administration and the more than 7 years that I was a prosecutor, full-time, not part-time, that not one woman has been prosecuted under these archaic laws. But if we want to see these archaic laws changed, that is a legislative solution. My opponent did run for the legislature in a failed candidacy for it. Maybe she should go to the legislature and get those laws changed. But I can tell you under my administration, as your county attorney, a woman will not be prosecuted for exercising her health care choices.
Ms. Gunnigle, to you, same question.
I'm shocked to hear that. On behalf of women everywhere, we are terrified about what Amy Coney Barrett's appointment looks like to the Supreme Court. And we know that Roe is in danger. And we're scared of those felony abortion laws because they mandate a 2-year mandatory minimum for accessing an abortion and a max of 5 years. And our current laws even criminalize the advertisement of contraceptives. Now, back in March, my opponent was asked this question, and she said that it would be her duty to enforce those laws were Roe v. Wade to fall. And then last month at a forum, she was asked whether or not she would enforce those laws, and she said that she would. And then on Monday, she was asked if she would enforce our felony abortion laws if Roe v. Wade fell, and she said yes. So to change here at a debate is, it's good news for Arizona women, but it also shows how little she understands about prosecutorial discretion as well. Because at the end of the day, it is our prosecutor's duty to determine what is in the interest of justice. And I have been unwavering in my commitment that it will never be part of the interest of justice to prosecute someone for their reproductive choices.
Allister, ACLU report, cases against whites in Maricopa County more likely to be dismissed or simply not filed. How do you respond to that report?
Well, I certainly inherited a lot of information to absorb from my predecessor, and I haven't had a lot of time to read the report. However, we have hired an outside expert to review the data because we did provide some data, for instance, on what was the first charge? Was it pled down? Things like this, the minutia, if you will, so that we can determine if there is an issue, then we absolutely have to address it. And that's part of my commitment for the last year to transparency and accountability, which is why I've created the first ever forward-facing to the public data dashboard, where our constituents can go and see the types of cases that are coming in, how they're resolved, demographic information, because that's our duty to share with you.
Sharing the information is one thing, but do you believe there's systemic racism in how people are prosecuted in Maricopa County?
Absolutely, yes. And that's been part of my commitment, is to work on those disparities. Since day one, I have met individually with members of the community that are activists, African American Clergy Coalition, to have these conversations, because I truly believe that having conversations to get information about how we can do this better is absolutely critical. And this is exactly why I'm making sure that we are taking a treatment-first approach, looking at the offender, not just the offense, and making sure that we have a good training program for our staff and for our prosecutors. I have changed up the makeup of our training department to make sure that we are recruiting more people of color. And it's been in the works since I started, and despite the pandemic, We were able to create, through government HR hurdles, the first ever in the county attorney's office diversity and inclusion coordinator, because I do believe this is an issue.
Okay, response, please. And again, the idea that this is a conscious decision, that cases against whites are dismissed at a higher rate.
The fact of the matter is our current county attorney has no plan to address the racial disparities in policing and sentencing here in Maricopa County, which are some of the worst in the entire country. The fact of the matter remains that she was asked back in March whether or not systemic racism exists in our criminal justice system, and her response was that she would discipline any prosecutor who inappropriately used race. And the fact of the matter is that shows a profound and deep misunderstanding of how these disparities come into play and how they're actually effectuated on Black and brown Arizonans. Listen, our current county attorney can't talk about race without using the word conversation. And respectfully, we've been in conversation for more than 200 years about race-based differences in law enforcement. She has no plan to address them.
As far as the race-based differences in Maricopa County, is that something that could be a holdover from the previous administration? Has she been in office enough to impact those numbers?
The fact of the matter is we don't know. What's up on the dashboard right now, which is a monument to the failures of previous administrations, show those race-based disparities. But she's been in office for 13 months by Election Day and still has no plan with respect to how to address them. My plan is simple for how we're going to disaggregate data, how we're going to stop treating all drug crimes as if they're the same because the current data dashboard lumps them all together, and how we're going to create policy with the help of the community that goes beyond conversation and translates into real action.
And a response, please.
Well, as to treating all drug crimes the same, part of my legislative agenda the last time, which I guess my opponent wasn't following, is that simple possession of methamphetamine, that's a class 4 felony, same as burglary or assault, and it shouldn't be. So we need to look at sentencing reforms. And it's not just starting with conversation, which is why I also created our Community Advisory Board, our Business Advisory Board, to talk about smart justice, criminal justice reform, to help us formulate a plan. When you're trying to steer a ship of this magnitude with 1,000 employees in the third largest district in the country, it takes time. And again, my record shows that I'm committed to keeping children and families safe, to public safety, and to making sure that we address these issues so that we have a solid criminal justice system. It's going to take time, and I'm so proud that we're engaging with the courts. We're engaging with our sheriff, who's been a dear friend of mine. We're engaging with the indigent defense bar and the private defense bar, having these conversations along with faith-based leaders, nonprofits, community leaders, because that's how we figure out solutions to social justice issues with cross-sector collaborations, which I have a proven record of.
Julie, let's move to the very specific issue of drugs. Proposition 207, early voting has already started, but November 3rd we'll know how Arizona voters feel about legalizing recreational marijuana. Ms. Adel's predecessor obviously was very much against legalization of marijuana in any form. How do you feel about Prop 207, and how would you feel about enforcing marijuana-related laws if Prop 207 fails?
Great question. I have said from the beginning of this campaign that we should no longer prosecute low-level marijuana offenses. It is no longer in the interest of justice, it wastes taxpayer money, and it destroys lives. So I hope those watching will join me in voting yes on 207 to enjoy the over $300 million of tax revenue it will bring in, and to know that marijuana will be regulated, it will be tested, and it will be kept out of the hands of children.
How much of a priority would drug crimes, low-level drug crimes, be for you if you were in office?
They shouldn't be a priority. In this office, in order to keep all Arizonans safe, we need to be focusing on crimes of violence, crimes that target women, children, and our seniors, human trafficking, and public corruption. That's what this office ought to be doing, not low-level drug offenses.
Allister, Prop 207, your predecessor was opposed to legalization of marijuana. What do you think?
Well, let me be clear. I'm not my predecessor. I have a record of my own accomplishments. I can tell you that under my administration, we have changed the way that we handle low-level drug offenses. Because, again, we're looking at the offender, not the offense, with a treatment-first approach. In fact, now we've instituted a policy that if somebody has a medical marijuana card, their charge is going to be dismissed. We want to give people the help that they need to do better and be better, which is why we have programs for that, to get people help. And then their charges get dismissed. We just want compliance. That's it. You know, any ballot initiative concerns me because, you know, we're stuck with it. We can't change it at the legislature. The courts can't change it absent some significant litigation. But whatever the law of the land is, we're going to shift how we do it. And Prop 207 is not retroactive. However, I can tell you, despite the pandemic, we have actually declined charges on a significant number of possession cases.
Does legalization concern you, though, as a citizen of the state?
You know, yes and no. I think that the community, if this is what the will of the voters is, then I respect that. My concerns as a citizen is as a mom of two, I just don't want access for my children. I'm concerned about driving under the influence and how we regulate that. And I'm pretty sure this is going to create a lot of work for the employment lawyers out there. So it'll be interesting to see. But it's the will of the voters in our state.
You both have mentioned sort of the charging behavior and patterns and stacking indictments. Ms. Adel, do you think that prosecutors in the past have used indictments as a tool to get people to plea to something, to load up the indictments? Has that been a practice? Is it a proper practice? And what would you do about it?
Yes, it has been a practice under my predecessors. And when I reorganized the office, we brought all of our supervisors in together and explained that we're not going to overcharge cases, because I truly believe just because you can doesn't mean you should. At the same time, with our statutes and our Constitution for victims' rights in this state, every victim deserves the integrity of their own sentence. I know my predecessors or my opponents mentioned Hannah priors. Let me give you two examples. The person who's drug addicted and he sells drugs to an undercover police officer 3 times over 5 days. Should that be stacked? Absolutely not. However, I would consider, you know, the guy who does a home invasion, over 5 home invasions, 5 different families, over 5 different days. That's a different story, much like when we had the serial shooter. I can tell you that my time during prosecutor, I don't ever recall using so-called Hannah priors. However, I do believe it is a useful tool, but that's why we have built into the plea policies under my administration to give more discretion, not to just the lawyers to resolve cases, but to the judges. So, because ultimately, the judges impose the sentence.
Ms. Gunnigle, if you make it into the office, what would be your charging policy? What would be your plea deal policy?
Absolutely. So we need to stop charging Hannah priors. Full stop. We need to stop stacking charges. We need to make sure that in instances where there are mandatory minimums, that those sentences actually meet the crime. And the fact of the matter is that my opponent wants to do everything possible to distance herself from her predecessor, Bill Montgomery, an individual for whom she spoke adoringly in her application and said she would be proud to build on his legacy. But the fact of the matter is, my opponent has perpetuated some of those disproportionate sentences. She argued for a 71-year sentence for a non-fatal car accident. She asked for an 8-year sentence for a senior citizen who didn't return a rental car on time. That's not showing good faith, and that's not showing a meaningful difference from administrations of the past.
And I guess outside those, you know, the examples you just mentioned, in pattern and principle, would the community still be safe if sentences were not tough? If people thought they didn't need to, or if they didn't think they needed to plead guilty to a crime, would our courts be clogged up with trials?
That is such an intelligent question. And I think what we need to recognize is that Arizona It was, is out of step with the rest of the nation. That's why we're the 5th largest incarcerator in the country. We do not need these disproportionately long sentences that my opponent argues for in order to keep our community safe. So my plan that takes down the incarceration rate by 26%, it takes us down to such liberal bastions as Utah, places that have, in fact, less crime, because it turns out that when you remove somebody from society, when you make it so they're not earning a living, they're not being part of their family, they're not being part of their community, you actually destabilize the community and make us all less safe.
And real quickly, for those who aren't familiar, what are Hannah Priors?
Absolutely. So the idea of Hannah Priors is a uniquely Arizona feature of law that allows somebody to be sentenced as a repeat criminal offender the very first time they see a judge. And it allows a prosecutor to stack charges such that the end result is a disproportionately long sentence. A disproportionately long sentence that then truth in sentencing applies to, where the person has to serve 85%, which again is not the standard throughout the nation.
Okay.
May I respond to that, please? My opponent says I spoke adoringly of my predecessor. Let me be very clear. I'm not Andrew Thomas, who is going to disparage a sitting justice. I will never do that. But again, I'm not him. My opponent talks about reducing the prison rate by 26%. Really what that means is reducing violent criminals. Because under my administration, we're doing what we can to keep people out of jail and prison so they're not institutionalized. And I have a record of that, not just ideas and rhetoric. Additionally, she mentioned a case of a car accident. I was actually second chair on that. I think my opponent knows about being second chair and locking somebody up wrongfully. The judge imposed that sentence. Given that person's conduct before, during, and after trial, given that person's criminal history, the sentence that the judge imposed was appropriate, and I stand behind that prosecution, and that person's conviction and sentence was upheld by a court of appeals in Arizona. But I understand the ethical duties on a prosecutor every single day.
I want to get a quick response because I think there was a shot there across the bow on something that you understand that we don't. What are we talking about here?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
What were you talking about there? Did you think your opponent understands something about wrongful prosecution or something along those lines?
Sure. I can say that in my more than 7 years as a prosecutor, I never locked up an African-American woman for more than 20 months where she had to have a hysterectomy in jail, who was acquitted of a crime that was ultimately overturned, and then the prosecutors were sued and held liable with an out-of-court settlement, which my opponent will say it was dismissed with prejudice. That's absolutely true. That's what happens when you settle a civil case. She will say, I didn't pay a dime. That's absolutely true. Because the taxpayers in Cook County were left with nearly $1 million because of her actions. So I invite you to go to the website Reformer versus Radical. That's Reformer vs. Radical, and you for yourself can see the facts.
Okay, that's what I wanted a response to.
Oh, please. That has been disproven so many times. Even the Arizona Republic looked at that attack, and that attack originated from one of my primary opponents, and said that it has been so decisively disproven about those actions. Listen, you know, as a prosecutor, we all have to make tough decisions. And the fact of the matter is that my opponent's record, that 51-year sentence, cost taxpayers $1.4 million to lock up Justin Dixon. That's not justice. And what the taxpayers want to know is that going forward, whether or not she'll stand by those sorts of sentences. And the fact of the matter is she said she will. That's what we can expect if we have another 4 years of this administration.
And may I respond?
Please.
To Mr. Dixon. As a prosecutor, I've had many death threats. Myself, my family. That will not be tolerated, even after your sentence. But again, I never advocated for that sentence. I offered him 3 plea agreements and where he could have been out by now. A judge sentenced him, not me.
Allister, and then Julie, I want to go to the science of prosecution, because it's hard for me to believe that anyone watching would expect either of you to be 100% perfect, because that's not possible in any aspect of life. But Allister, take us through the process for yourself, the mindset you go into with your years of being a prosecutor when you go down this road and decide? Because, again, there are going to be things that Julie can point out, mistakes you've made, you can point out hers, but what should expectations for voters be when they put a leader in this office knowing they're not going to get perfection?
Well, as you said, none of us are perfect. I'm not either. I make mistakes every day. I've got 2 little boys, and some days I'm just winging it. But I can tell you that, like I said in my opening statement, I went to law school to be a prosecutor. It is in my DNA. I have a proven track record. The expectation for the voters should be that they are electing someone who has actually been a full-time prosecutor, not a part-time prosecutor who has gotten sued. The expectation for the voters is that they put somebody in office who has actually run agencies, and I've run 3. I was brought in. I wasn't recruited. I was recruited to run the Arizona Department of Transportation and other state agencies. I have a proven track record of managing people, a budget, being at the legislature, strategic planning, and that's absolutely critical in this job when you have 1,000 employees. And I will also stand on my record from the bipartisan vote that installed me into this office as your county attorney, that I have a very good record of accomplishments and change in the last year. And moving forward, we are going to continue that, look at smart criminal justice reforms, but most importantly, public safety, not just rhetoric about reforms. Public safety is paramount. Without public safety, we don't have a good economy. So therefore, I am committed to that and keeping children and families safe as I have been all year.
So, Julie, voters are going to need to know you're going to lead in a particular direction. That's important because they're not going to look at every single case all the time. So what's going to make you different from Ms. Adel?
Absolutely. And I think it's a very different vision that we bring to this office, a commitment to bring down the rate of incarceration, to be smart with these reforms, and to hold people accountable when they break the law. And that includes police officers. I've got a plan that will include building public trust and building community. But what I do need to respond to while I have this opportunity is the fact that my opponent just attacked me for taking maternity leave. And I can't believe that women still do this to each other. And I want those in this office and everywhere to know that when I'm county attorney, it will be respected if you need to take a part-time, or in my case, a flex-time position to care for your family.
Oh, we do that
I'll
now,
also
actually.
know.
We do
I also
part-time.
know that there has been, to date, this is my opponent's 3rd political appointment. And what she didn't mention is where her 2nd political appointment was. It was the Department of Child Safety during one of the most corrupt and inept times in its history, a time where children died because of the mismanagement of that particular agency. So while she wants to run against my record, she needs to run on her own as well.
Allister, can we get a response on that one, please?
Sure. This is the first I heard that was on maternity leave. If you look at her deposition, she talks about working 25 hours a week as a prosecutor. And I will tell you, in our office, having been a mother, it is paramount to me. And in our office, I'm proud to say that we have 67% of our staffers are women, and I support them. Now, as for the allegation about Department of Child Safety, I was appointed as the first general counsel when it was newly created agency because of the scandals that were happening at the former Child Protective Services Division. And I left there to be with my 2 young sons and work with nonprofits. I'm a proud member of Phoenix Rotary 100 and a past president where I focus on human trafficking. And now I'm the chair of the Child Help Advisory Board. And that's what I wanted to focus on.
No less than John Legend has weighed in on this race, and I know he's performed concerts here and eaten at the Waffle House in Tolleson, but Ms. Gunnigle, why do you think this race is getting such attention outside of Arizona?
Well, it's getting such attention because we have been so out of step with the rest of the nation when it comes to criminal justice reform for such a long time. So it was our bold platform of stopping the practice of ending cash bail, of stopping the charge stacking, of creating veterans pre-adjudication felony courts to better serve those who have served our nation that got John Legend and so many others attention in this race. And I'm really proud of the diverse coalition that I've built who's endorsed me and is behind this campaign.
Ms. Adel, do you think John Legend and others are concerned about veterans pre-adjudication court?
I think that they're concerned about taking the county because in the last election cycle, there were 8 district and county attorneys targeted by outside money, and only one of them survived, and that was my predecessor, because in our county we value public safety and keeping families and children safe. As far as something like a pre-adjudication veterans court that my opponent mentioned, my transition team, we've actually been working on that. We had a very diverse transition team because I've seen how it's worked in the cities, but we also are creating a veterans diversion program. We are working towards all of these things, but it takes time. Anybody who has worked in leadership and government would understand that you can't just flip a switch and make things happen. It's a collaborative effort.
We kind of running out of time here. We got closing statements coming up here. Before we get there, let's start with you, Julie. Do you see prosecution as a way to proscribe behavior?
Oh, what a good question. You know, it should be the role of this office to make sure that all Arizonans feel safe, and that includes communities of color, that includes children, and that includes those who've been targeted by our criminal justice process. So do I see the criminal law as a way to prescribe behavior? You know, I'd say more that it's a way that we keep all of us safe by having our priorities straight, by focusing on those crimes that matter, and then by protecting the taxpayer who at the end of the day has to pay for all of this justice.
Okay, and Allister, again, is it a way, do you see the office as a way to change the public's behavior?
You know, there's different theories about criminal law and punishment. You know, is it restorative justice? Are we rehabilitating people? Is it just punitive? And again, under my leadership, we have taken a treatment-first approach on everything to make sure that we are getting people the help they need to do better and be better. This is not the perfect system, but I am committed to working to make sure it is a better system. And that's what I've been doing for the last year as your county attorney. Speaking of saving taxpayer dollars, yes, that's absolutely critical. That's why we send people to diversion. You know why? Normal prosecution takes 18 months to 2 years. So you have a defendant, the prosecutor, the defense attorney going into court, taking time off work. And ultimately, it's resolved in 4 to 8 months, and they get it dismissed. And so for me, that is my commitment to the economy and helping people be better and do better.
Okay, and real quickly, one last question here, somewhat kind of overarching everything. And again, we're running out of time here, so we got to make it quick. The job of the county attorney. Will you enforce laws, Julie, we'll start with you. Will you enforce laws that you personally think are unlawful?
I will enforce laws when it is in the interests of justice. That is what a prosecutor's calling is. Okay,
so if you personally think it's unlawful, there's a chance that you might not enforce that law.
The interests of justice look to what the community needs. How do we keep the community safe, and how do we protect the taxpayers?
Okay, Allister, what about you?
My job is not to let my personal opinion come into this. The role of a prosecutor is to be fair and impartial. And that's why I have a tremendous team around me. When I have a question about should we do this or not, I look to others too. It's about being fair and impartial and doing what's right for the right reasons every single time.
All right, candidates, thank you very much. Great debate. Time now for closing statements. And going in reverse order of our opening remarks, we start with Julie Gunnigle.
It's been my pleasure to join you this evening and share my vision of a criminal justice system that can be tough, smart, and fair. You know, Arizona, we have a problem. It's a problem when we're the 5th largest incarcerator in the country. It's a problem when we have an office that has bred community distrust. And it's a problem when we have a prosecutor who does not have a single person of color anywhere near her attorney leadership team. It's not reflective of who we are as Arizonans, and we need to do better. I'm committed as Maricopa County Attorney to make sure that we have action rather than mere conversation, that we have a prosecutor who's willing to breed unity and not division, and that together we fix our criminal justice system rather than merely maintaining the status quo. You know, we have a system here that is fractured and we need change. And I would encourage you to visit Gunnigle2020.com for more about me, my platform, and I humbly ask for your vote before November 3rd.
All right, thank you very much. And now the closing statement from Allister Adel.
Well, thank you to all of you. Thanks for the viewers to watching this. This is a critical race. It's critical for our public safety. I can tell you, as the first woman county attorney, I have a record of accomplishments that include holding criminals accountable, getting treatment for those who want it, and keeping children and families safe. If I'm honored to have your vote, I will continue to fight to keep dangerous criminals away, to protect victims' rights, and make sure that those that want to do better and be better get the opportunity to do so. This job is not about politics, political activism, or rhetoric. It's about doing the right things for the right reasons. This is also not the time for on-the-job training. This needs knowledge of being a full-time experienced prosecutor. It needs leadership of somebody who's actually been an administrator. It needs experience of somebody who's done the job and real results. You can visit my website at allisteradel.com to learn more about me. I hope that I've earned your support, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you, candidates, and thank you for joining us on this election 2020 debate for the Maricopa County Attorney's Office.
You can watch these debates again online at azpbs.org, where you can also watch other previous shows.
And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.